Welcome to Keeping Up with Our Community, a podcast for and about Romeo Community Schools. Each week, we will invite different guests to share insights about some unique aspects of our schools. This podcast is powered by the MIT TV of Romeo, Michigan. If you're looking to start a podcast for your business or personal use, look no further than MIT TV. They can get you access to equipment, a production engineer, and you can even edit your podcast. That's all right here at the MIT TV of Romeo, Michigan, and you can contact them right now via email at mit.tvromeo@gmail.com. That's mitt.tvromeo@gmail.com. Hello, my name is Marian Brush, and I am the Communications and Marketing Supervisor for Romeo Community Schools. It is my pleasure to introduce Episode 8 of the Keeping Up with Our Community Schools podcast. Today's episode will focus on anxiety and will be hosted by Mary Selden, Director of Special Services for Romeo Community Schools. Our guests today are mental health professionals Kristen Famiano, counselor at the 9th Grade Academy, Kelsey Frazier, District School Psychologist, and Chelsea Robichaud, School Social Worker at Washington Elementary. I will now turn it over to Mrs. Selden to lead the discussion.
Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure to be hosting this episode of Keeping Up with Our Community Schools podcast. After reviewing feedback in our winter 2023 climate survey, parents asked for more resources on anxiety, as well as other wellness recommendations. Our goal is to continue to create more resources on those topics and others to help students, parents, and staff in our community. As always, if you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health concern that impacts your daily life, please call your doctor. If you or someone you know is having thoughts of suicide, please dial 988 for free confidential help 24/7. You can also text HOME, HOME, to 741-741. Dial 1-800-273-TALK, TALK, or go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org, as well as call 911 for emergency help. Our topic today is on anxiety. And when I was thinking of anxiety, I first wanted to just start off on what is the definition of anxiety. Cambridge Dictionary says that anxiety is an uncomfortable feeling of nervousness or worry about something that is happening or might happen in the future. The Oxford Dictionary states that it is a state of uneasiness accompanied by dysphoria and somatic signs and symptoms of tension focused on apprehension of possible failure, misfortune, or danger. But we're talking about school. What is the anxiety that we see in school, and what does anxiety mean for our students and our staff that works with them? Kelsey, Chelsea, Kristen, what are your thoughts on the anxiety that you see in school?
So dealing with 9th graders, especially with that transition to high school, they often have stress responses. The first set of tests, sometimes students end up in my office that, they start out by saying, I have no idea why I'm so upset about whatever the topic might be. And what I try to explain to students and what I try to educate them on is that what's going on with the anxiety is it's going on. It's a brain response. It's a stress response to a perceived threat. And that's super important for our students to understand, because there's a misconception that we can control our emotions. We can control, it's something outside of us. It's something you can't see, and that we're in charge of these things. But we have some responses within our body controlled by our brain with the intent to keep us alive. So I wanted to start out with that because it is more of a biological reaction involving the brain. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey because I love her explanation much more than my very analytic description of what the different parts of the brain are. So I want to hear about the owl, meerkat, and tiger.
So Chelsea and I do a lot of trainings, and we have an analogy for a stressed brain. And they have the owl, the meerkat, and the tiger. And they say those things live in your brain. Those animals live in your brain. And it works for our elementary students, but it also works for our middle school and even high school students. And it came from Star Commonwealth, but the owl is kind of like your thinking brain. So that's the part of your brain that you're able to think with. And then the tiger is living in your brain, and he's either sleeping or playing. And then we have the meerkat, who is kind of always on lookout. Is there stress? Is there what's going to happen? He's kind of like your alarm system. So when your meerkat sounds the alarm, it says something to the tiger, and the tiger goes, uh-oh, I have to fight or flight. And then that tiger all of a sudden scares your owl away. So your thinking brain is gone. So you're unable to kind of think and process. And that's kind of what happens with our students that experience anxiety or nervousness, is their thinking brain is gone. And then they just have that fight or flight or even freeze feeling of not knowing what to do next. And it's our job to kind of quiet that meerkat down so the tiger calms down, and then the owl wants to come back.
So basically the brainstem, make sure our bodies stay, alive, our heart rate increases, we breathe in more oxygen when we have a perceived threat, there's more blood flow to our limbs.
Yeah.
Limbic system, that's the controls the emotion, the fight or flight response.
Yeah.
The amygdala is a huge part of that. And when that takes over, I call it the amygdala hijack.
Yeah.
And then we have the frontal lobe, which controls that reasoning and memory. That's the owl. And it shuts down with that stress once the limbic system, takes over. And the goal, again, is to decrease that fight response and to bring us back to being able to think and reason. Now, obviously, we can't just think rationally 100% of the time. We are human beings that need to feel. We need to stay alive. We need to do that. So I think the goal for counselors and social workers is to bring both parts together.
Yeah.
And to have, to have reasoning along with our emotion, and to have both parts present. Yes, students should care about tests that they have.
Yeah.
They should care, but it should not be a perceived threat that they are going to die because they have a test.
Yes. And I think that it's important to note that some level of an anxiety for everybody is okay. Mm-hmm. It protects us, right? It keeps us away from danger. It makes us prepare, right? Some level of anxiety, preparing for an exam, preparing for a sports event. It's okay to get nervous sometimes. That is an okay feeling. It's really when it's impacting your daily life, over a longer period of time, you can't go to school or you can't participate in functions you normally would, that it becomes more maladaptive.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to understand that to go through anxiety or feel that is sometimes we might not know the reason why it's happening. And how we have to get through it is we have to move through it. I think I work with another social worker, and she always says to get through anxieties, you have to push through it. And I think that that's been really important to understand, is sometimes we don't always need to figure out the why it's happening. We just need to figure out how to get our body back regulated. Mm-hmm. And then kind of go back to the process once we've calmed down of, okay, let's deconstruct why we got anxious or why we experienced such anxiety. And then once we deconstruct it and understand why we started to feel those things, maybe it's because we're so determined, we care so much, that's why we got nervous. Or it's our passion and we don't want to do it wrong. Things like that. If we can understand where it's coming from and it's not just the uncomfortable anxiety bubble, it kind of starts to hold more meaning, which is kind of, I guess it's helped me too to push through it. I mean, even for example, like right now, this is a passion, but I'm pushing through it because I'm determined to share my knowledge on this.
One story I love to tell always when people say they can't really identify with the level of anxiety that takes over, and everybody has it, but we've all felt anxious, but sometimes they say, I'm typically pretty cool and calm and I don't let very much rattle me. And I always use this because it usually in the room, everybody can, kind of knows what I experienced if you grew up with a basement. And so this idea that, as a kid, my mom would send me to the basement to get a couple things or to get something she needed. And I would go downstairs, and the basement it wasn't a nice finished basement. It was this kind of this dark, scary place that I would go down, and I would know rationally, logically that there was, I'm, at an older age, and even as a middle-aged woman, that we don't have monsters in the basement. There's nothing lurking in the basement. But I go down the basement, my heart starts to race. I get almost this panic feeling. And then I sprint back up the stairs. And if there's a door at the top of the stairs, I slam the door behind me because there's something scary in the basement. And my body has perceived a threat that my mind knows is not existent, but my body still reacts in that way. And I hope any of our listeners are laughing at that, because when I talk to students, almost 2/3 of the class raise their hand and smile and laugh, and everyone still experiences that. And I say, imagine feeling like that consistently or over a prolonged period of time, that can be extremely wearing on your body physically, on your muscles, on your heart rate, on your heart, just how your ability to function. So it's important that we start to recognize the signs early so we can put some of these coping skills in place.
Yeah, and your body, I like how you reference the body, because your body remembers. Even if your brain doesn't really remember why you're stressed, your body is going to react that way. We use a lot of our in our trainings, we reference like a car accident is what we say. So if, let's say, you're driving on the way to work and you almost get in a car accident, what happens to your body, right? Your heart immediately starts pounding, your hands get sweaty, you like grip the steering wheel, you're immediately having that body reaction. You get to work, your day goes on, everything's okay, you kind of forget about what happened, but the second you jump back into your car, what happens after work? Like, you're not consciously thinking about it, but I know for me, I immediately am grabbing that steering wheel, my palms start getting sweaty, my heart starts pounding. So my body remembers something from previously, and that's a lot of times how anxiety works too. Once it kind of starts, it's hard to not perpetuate.
And importantly, we can trigger those thoughts and our body responses by messages we're sending ourselves. So when I work with the ninth graders within the ninth grade academy, many of them are telling themselves, I have to get an A, I have to get an A, or if I don't get an A, I'm going to ruin my whole future. And they start this catastrophic thinking, and they're triggering that system, that the amygdala, the flight fight response, by the messages they're sending themselves. And so it's important that, yes, many of those danger and warning signs and stressors come from outside, but they also come from messages we send ourselves. So we've talked, I think, a lot about what happens within our bodies, what can cause them, and what I'm guessing is, and we're all, while we are mental health professionals, none of us is perfect when it comes to dealing with that anxiety and putting those into place. And, even though, again, rationally we know these things and what to do, when we're in that moment, it can still be very difficult to put those things into place.
Because that thinking brain is just kind of gone, and we got to work through it. Yeah, I just feel like sometimes students feel like they don't have the control. We will experience it. Everybody experiences these uncomfortable feelings, some more than others, for sure. But kind of giving power in once we're aware of it in our body, then we can start to regulate it. And I think that it's much harder for others, but some, with practice, it does help. And I think that I heard a quote recently, and I was telling everybody that, everybody experiences the butterflies in your stomach. You get nervous and you start to feel like all those physical feelings, like your stomach kind of hurts. You start to get like lightheaded because those butterflies are going crazy. But I heard a quote is like, get your butterflies in formation. So it's not saying get rid of your butterflies, because like Chelsea said, we do need some anxious feelings. We do need that for our body. But we have the control to kind of get them in formation and kind of move through it. Again, it's much harder for some others, and we understand that, and that's where we continue to work with our students too.
I heard somebody say recently that they want to sit with their anxiety, and that really resonated with me. They wanted to experience it because we do need practice. If we don't practice, it's not going to get any better. Also, with our safety training, we do a lot of that in school now. This is something that we don't hear of as often. So we hear fight or flight, but we also sometimes forget about the freeze response. So anxiety can also trigger a freeze response. I should have said that, I should have done this, but people feel frozen in that moment when it's an anxious scenario for them. There's a lot of types of anxiety. So there's school anxiety, social anxiety, generalized anxiety. There's phobias, separation anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, panic disorder. And I know, especially after COVID, we're seeing a lot more of that in schools today. How do you help our students with that, with more specific needs? Or what should parents do if they're noticing that their child's struggling?
So when it comes to anxiety regarding school, one of the key points is one way to decrease anxieties, decrease insecurity, and increase mastery of the content. So, which means that many students walk into a test, and even though first it starts with work completion. So I complete my homework, my daily work. I increase my confidence with the material. If I have a couple of errors on my daily work and I work through those corrections, now it's going to increase my confidence that I know what the content is, I'm proficient in what the material is. And when I walk into a test, and while I might have that typical anxiety for a test because I care a lot about my grade, that having that typical anxiety is manageable because I put in the time and the work and the effort. The first test might be a little bit more anxiety, but once kids get the hang of it, they typically can have their expectations can be more reasonable there. The key is the students that work completion asking questions when they need help. And that can be really hard for ninth graders as well. And reaching out, we work with them about reaching out to the teachers about how do I communicate with teachers. Many of them are scared if they don't know. So a key, I guess a key reflex is to avoid a stressful situation. So then they don't reach out to them or they don't attend tutoring. And so the key is to increase their mastery, to increase their ability to ask for help, to ask questions. And then ultimately they'll complete more of their work, and which increases their level of mastery, and they'll feel better and more confident walking into those tests. So that's when it comes with anxiety with academics. Mm-hmm. And so I'll let I'll turn over to you two here.
And I know, like, at the elementary level, a lot of times we talk a lot about preparation, right? That same kind of concept, but with elementary kids, being able to walk them through it, especially during transition times. Like, I know for elementary, the beginning of the year is extremely hard, coming back from breaks, as is probably high school and middle school as well. But those times, especially leaving parents with kids who might have some of that separation anxiety, that's really difficult time for them. So walking them through it and preparing them for it. In 2 days, we're going back to school. In the morning, this is how your routine's going to look. I'm going to drop you off at the door and you're going to go in and you're going to have, walking them through kind of the steps of the day, I think is really helpful, because sometimes I think it's easy to shy away from it or think like, oh, I don't want to talk about it. They're going to get so upset. But I think kind of talking about those feelings is really important, and talking about how things are going to go, so that preparation piece.
Yeah, that visual rehearsal in your mind and helping them through it, and also maintaining the boundaries of it. If that's the visual rehearsal that you're practicing for, is maintaining that expectation that there's no wiggle room, like this is what it's going to look like. I also think that, like, at home, as a parent too, I mean, even for me, is modeling that emotional regulation. We have the skills, maybe a lot more than our students or our kids, because they're still learning. And so we kind of take it for granted of how well we can regulate our emotions. It's so natural. So when you're starting to feel anxious or you're starting to feel even mad, like, label it. Oh my gosh, my stomach is starting to get tense. My head is starting to feel like it's going to burst. I need to take a break because I'm getting mad. Because a lot of students, when we talk about our feelings, they're like, wait, you feel that too? Mm-hmm. Because we regulate so naturally. And I think that letting them understand that, yeah, we experience these big, uncomfortable feelings as well, but we've gained the tools to regulate. Mm-hmm. And I think that gives them a perspective of like, oh, it's not, I'm not so different. Like, I just need practice. Yeah. And I think that's been a great tool. I mean, I use it a lot too.
I can't tell you how many times a student has looked at me and been like, Mrs. Robichaud, do you feel worried? Do you get scared?
You get mad?
Yeah.
No way.
It's like we're not allowed to have those feelings because we're big.
You're
but
only
I think
happy.
Exactly. Validating them like, oh no, I get nervous a lot, and this is what I do when I'm nervous, and kind of going through that with them or practicing that with them is such a great thing to do.
And I always think that there's a lot of students that have this conception of like being happy is where you're always supposed to be. Like, you're always supposed to feel happy. So it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. We need these emotions to get through the day. So they're healthy. We need to not get stuck, of course. But just understanding that, happy is not the best place to be at all times, because you don't need to be happy in every moment. And I think,
especially if it's not genuine.
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
exactly. So it's my daughter will always look at me and be like, Mom, are you happy? And I'm like, it's okay if I'm not. Like, that's okay. And so kind of bringing that context to kids and students. Yeah.
So by the time the students make it to my office or make it to the office, many times they're already in a state that their anxiety is at a level where, okay, now we need to do some triage here, even though we're not a medical facility. So there are skills. I pulled this from the Dialectical Behavioral Therapy Manual, which is one of many types of therapies out there. And there are skills called the TIP skills. And the T in TIP stands for tipping the temperature. So when we get anxiety and we think about how our brain works, oftentimes our body temperature comes up. If you ever put your hand on the back of your child, a lot of times you'll feel the heat coming off of their bodies. I'm the listeners can't see me, but I'm very fair complected. My ears get bright red. I get blotchy. I have a towel. I could never do anything where I had to bluff because, I have that towel with my anxiety, but the tipping the temperature. So I will often, use cold water as, put something cold on the back of my neck or on my head. I had a student tell me recently that she just randomly, she was very angry one night. It was one of the cold days, and she just went outside and stood outside for a couple minutes, and she said it helped. And so, and that was before any conversation, obviously only for a couple minutes. We wouldn't want people to stay outside for a long time. And just to kind of turn that body temperature in the other direction. The I stands for intense exercise. So again, this idea that our adrenal system has been triggered. So our flight and fight. So our body is often saying, we have that blood flowing to our limbs, and our body's saying, run, run. And so a lot of times we'll tell students, please, let's take a lap. Let's take a lap together. Do you want to take a lap? Why don't we get a drink of water? Why don't we walk and move? And then the P is paced breathing. And so this idea that we, breathe in for 5 seconds. We want to always exhale for longer than we breathe in. So it's maybe 5, seconds in, 6 seconds out, 5 complete breaths per minute. So tip skills can help once a person has already reached that. But the idea is to catch it early so we don't get to that state where we have to implement the tip skills and other things. What do you do? What do you see at the elementary level?
We do a lot of that. I mean, we do a lot of walking breaks, a lot of sensory breaks when they need it, kind of taking a lap, getting a drink of water. We do a lot of different breathing exercises. I'm lucky at Washington, all of our classrooms have calming corners in them. So they have an area of the classroom that kind of has like a comfortable place to sit with some fidgets and different breathing visuals that the kids can look at. And that has been really helpful for kids as well because they use that pretty often. A lot of drawing. I'm at the elementary level. The kids, a lot of them really, really love to draw, and that's the way.
I've seen you map body parts and where they're feeling their tension, their anxiety.
Yes.
What it looks like, what it feels like.
A lot of times at the elementary level, I see a lot of somatic complaints. So they'll go down to the office and they'll say that they're going to throw up. Their stomach hurts. They don't feel good. They have a headache. But they're unable at that point to recognize that the two are connected. They're not yet aware or self-aware enough to know that, I'm feeling really nervous and that is why I feel sick, or I'm feeling really nervous and that's why I feel like I'm going to throw up. They can't really make that connection yet. So I think a lot of times drawing it out and being able to see like, okay, I see that you have butterflies in your stomach in this picture. What was happening right before that? And kind of going through it with them. Sometimes they're able to make that connection like, oh, wait, I had to go out in front of the whole class and talk about something and then I started feeling sick. I wonder if they're connected. So being able to really kind of bring some awareness to that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think, as we go back to like once their thinking brain comes back is talking about it and labeling it and making a meaningful dialogue. So then when it happens again, they're like, okay, so when I get up in front of class, this is what happens to my body. What can I do? Back to that visual rehearsal and then understand it and kind of break apart what those anxious feelings are. Why are we feeling it? What more information do we need to get through it? So, and you kind of cater it to what grade they're in, but really just helping them through it again.
So visualization and also that positive self-talk.
Yeah. Well, and I think
huge.
we go back to those thinking errors. You talk about catastrophizing or the darkened lenses. Everything is in the negative lens, things like that. So I think figuring out what their thinking error is that gets them stuck, because like we said, we all have it, but it's the students that feel stuck in that anxious feeling. And where is that falling apart? What thinking error are they experiencing in that moment to kind of push through it? So yeah, I think, and I think once they can get calm and regulated, they want to talk about it because they want to solve why they feel that way, because no one loves staying stuck there. No one.
And they're probably really tired too, because after all that physiological response that happens, I know that I'm exhausted after that.
It's exhausting. It puts your body through a lot.
Parents are often asking us, what are some signs of anxiety? What should I look for in my student? Some Typical signs would be trouble concentrating, making decisions, feeling irritable, tense, restless, experiencing nausea, abdominal distress, having heart palpitations, sweating, trembling, shaking, trouble sleeping, having a sense of impending danger, panic, or doom. Are there any others that you would add to that list, or any at the elementary or secondary settings that you see a lot that we've begun to talk about?
I think sometimes we see the externalizing behaviors, like the behaviors that are kind of like, moving around the classroom a lot, or shoving materials around, or wanting to hide underneath desks, or run out of the room, things like that, that disrupt learning, their learning, and the others' learning because they're trying to avoid what's making them feel
Hoodie
anxious.
over the head.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know, talking through with parents about anxiety, a lot of times they'll note that, oh, I noticed that they weren't sleeping that good, or that they woke up in the morning and every single morning was a fight to go to school. And then when they get to school, I would see a lot of crying or a lot of avoidance. Those are typically things that I see.
And I also noticed that, for parents, it's very difficult because you don't know when to push. You don't know, when should I push them? When should I give them a hug? And when do I let them stay home? When do I push? And so I always go back to one of my really good friends. His mom was a teacher for decades, and she would always say, you can't decide whether or not you can handle the day from the comfort of your own bed. So making your student get up in the morning, making them, get in the shower, having them start. Sometimes students have to start in the office with me, and then we take it hour by hour. And I would say the majority of the time, more often than not, that they're able to get through the day. And some days are about survival and getting through because of that level of anxiety as well.
Yeah. No, I love that quote, because I think we all, when we wake up, there's a lot of things we want to avoid, or they're making us nervous. And then I used to always tell myself growing up, because I, experienced anxiety, that when I woke up, I'm like, okay, I got to get through it. But no matter what, I'll be back in the same bed. And I used to tell myself that. And I, especially like on cross country meet race days or things like that, I would be like, okay, no matter what, I'm going to be right back here, and it's going to be okay. So that's a perfect quote. It kind of goes back to, what I grew up saying, just the opposite.
It's hard to sometimes do that, but then if you avoid it one day, what happens is it snowballs. And often we see that anxiety grow and grow and grow when it has been avoided for so long.
Yeah.
And when things become too comfortable, there's not a lot of practice, right? And so they're not sitting with the anxiety. Okay, I'm going to break this next segment up into two parts. So some strategies for anxiety. We're going to talk about some recommendations from the National Association of School Psychologists. We'll talk about that first. And then second, we'll discuss some recommendations about the American School Counselor Association's recommendations for dealing with anxiety. So first, the National Association of School Psychologists recommend to help children examine their thoughts and decide whether their worries are realistic or unrealistic, to explicitly teach children how to engage in flexible thinking, practice responding to anxiety-inducing situations that children are likely to incur, model adaptive ways of coping with anxiety, encourage children to tolerate their anxiety, encourage children to come up with their own solutions to the problem, teach children about the connection between anxiety and physical symptoms, teach children to self-monitor their physical symptoms, and prompt children to use their anxiety management strategies when they have physical symptoms. Many of these we've addressed already. Is there any additional comments or strategies that we're using in school?
Yeah, I would say the first one on there, when it comes to help children examine their thoughts and decide whether their worries are realistic or unrealistic, I just simply say focus on the facts. Focus what's going on right now, working with students that sometimes parents have health issues or things that are out of their control. Let's not let our minds go to the worst case scenario. Let's focus on what is real. What do we know right now? What are the facts at hand in this moment? So I just say focus on the facts.
Yes.
Yeah. No.
And validate the feelings, right? Like, I know a lot of times it's easy, especially, at the older levels, I think sometimes have a little bit more awareness. Sometimes at the younger levels, it would be easy to be like, okay, but that's never happening.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't pass your
Dismissive.
spelling
Yeah.
test, you're not gonna not graduate. Like, that's not a realistic thought. But I think validating that feeling is really important, and hearing them and saying that you understand them is really important, even if we know deep down that that's never going to happen or that it's not realistic, still validating that thought.
Well, and sometimes I feel I've done an activity with students where it's like squash your worries, and we take like a fly swatter out. So they write their worries down, and we're like, okay, say your worry. And then they say it, and we kind of talk about it, and we say, what are the, kind of back to what are the facts?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh, okay. And then they slap it. And it's that like, that slap of slapping the worry away for the younger students that kind of feels good. Like, oh, you're right. I can squash that worry. It's not worth getting too big. So that visualization and then keeping it what's real, what's not likely to happen.
Also focusing on what you can control and what
Exactly.
you can't. So investing your energy into positive things you can do and trying to limit worrying about something that's out of your control. Okay, the American School Counselor Association recommends deep breathing, slowing heart rate, lowering blood pressure, increasing oxygen intake all have a calming effect. Common exercises are belly breathing and the 4-7-8 breathing exercise. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 7, exhale for 8. Another strategy is grounding. Grounding can distract students' mind from the anxiety and keep them grounded in the present. Common exercises include the 5-4-3-2-1 census technique, 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, etc. Counting how many things in shades of a particular color you can see around you, counting backwards by 7, starting at 100, etc. Imagery, when students create a detailed mental image of a safe place and a peaceful place, they redirect attention away from what is stressing them out and towards an alternate focus. Progressive muscle relaxation, this is a practice of tightening one muscle group at a time, followed by a relaxation phase with release of tension. Students tense and relax the muscle groups one at a time in a specific order, beginning with the lower extremities and ending with their face. Positive self-talk and affirmations. This helps students challenge self-sabotaging and negative thoughts. Students can practice through journal writing, negative thought stopping, snapping a rubber band during negative thoughts. You can also help your child select affirmations that speak to them. When students repeat those affirmations and believe them, they can start to make other positive changes. Journaling specifically helps students clarify their thoughts and feelings, gaining valuable self-knowledge. Students can process their anxiety by fully exploring and releasing the emotions that are involved. And desk yoga, neck rolls, cat-cow stretch, shoulder shrugs, triceps stretches, seated twists, and seated poses are all exercises students can discreetly practice at their desk when they're at school. What are your thoughts on some other strategies that we just discussed?
I think those are all, they kind of are like a well-rounded response of what we do. I think my favorite with students is the grounding exercises, kind of bringing us back into the moment of the here and now, realizing this is what we can control in this moment. And then the positive self-talk, just kind of changing it up a bit, is helping them, get those affirmations. But it's also what I've been doing with students is if we're in a group, I'll give those affirmations and let them hear me say it about them to someone else. Like, oh my gosh, I love how they are such good listeners. And then they start, it's not to them, so they don't get kind of bashful or uncomfortable, but then they start to hear like, oh, she thinks that of me and someone else now thinks that of me. So then they start to build into that. So I kind of naturally embed that in groups or working with students. And then even at home too. So, and there's been some studies too about that as well.
Mm-hmm. I second all of that. And then I know like a lot for the deep breathing, we do a lot of different exercises. There's a lot of fun ways you can do that with kids, have them practice deep breathing without them really knowing. I know a lot of times there's like an activity I do where we make hot chocolate. And you have to smell the hot chocolate in through your nose, and it's hot, so you have to blow on it with your mouth. That practices deep breathing. Same thing with like a flower. You can smell the flower, like a dandelion, and you can blow it and watch it kind of blow away. There's lots of different ways that you can practice deep breathing. Bubbles is a huge way in the lower L and upper L, just to be able to blow bubbles. That's a great way to practice deep breathing, and we do that quite often. And then with the imagery, like I mentioned earlier, that drawing piece, a lot of kids are very creative. And it's a great way for them to be able to kind of get their feelings out or draw that image of something that is positive and something that makes them happy. And being able to keep that image with them throughout the day in their classroom is sometimes really helpful.
One thing that's not on either list that I have found to be extremely helpful, other than exercise and walking and things like that, is music. Music is great. It reminds me of maybe some good times in the past. It has up tempo beats. If the key is to not play music that's going to make the feeling at the moment deeper than what you're already experiencing. So maybe playing something opposite of the feeling or the condition, the state that we're in, that we're trying to reverse. And so I find music is extremely helpful. And, while I'm walking, while I'm coloring, while I'm drawing or doodling, combining those things or combining any of these together can be really helpful. Imagining something and then drawing it can be extremely helpful. Muscle relaxation, especially because, again, this anxiety affects us physically. It has that lasting effect with the muscle tension. I know I always hold mine in my neck and my shoulder area. And so I find myself doing a lot of neck rolls throughout the day. So definitely helping. And as far as bubbles goes, I've also found, this is going to sound, so whenever I hear the word, it makes me think of a funny activity where try to say bubbles in an angry manner, and you can't. You can't. It just, then you end up just laughing because you're trying to say bubbles, like bubbles, like really in an angry way. So I love just bubbles, just even the word. So.
Yeah, no, I think those are all great. And students enjoy them. I think when they get more of these tools and practice them more, they start to use them independently. But it just takes time.
Okay, any other additional comments before we wrap up? Anything else that you want to share? I know one thing on my mind is we're lucky when anxiety shows itself close to the situation. So if it's something that they were just doing or just thinking or just happened, but sometimes it's more complex than that, right? Sometimes we have to do some mapping and some conversation and really get to the root of what's causing the anxiety. And sometimes it surprises us, myself included, and can pop up at an unusual time. So it's not always directly connected to what was just happening, but could have been an underlying feeling. And that takes a little more work for parents and for teachers at school.
Yeah. I think I always walk a fine line, and it is a fine line of normalizing the behavior or normalizing the feeling without minimizing their experience. And I think because sometimes when you try to normalize it, then you have students say, but you don't understand. And it does feel that way if you start to normalize what they're going through. So it's kind of walking that fine line and working with our students of normalizing that we all feel this, but not minimizing how intense it feels for them. And so it's, I always keep that in my mind when I'm working with students experiencing that.
And also some of the mental health conditions that are aligned with anxiety, when we get to the state where we're putting kind of a name on it to treat a diagnosis, looking at things like obsessive compulsive disorder, some of the eating disorders out there where anxiety is a component. Depression oftentimes is a result of generalized anxiety. When we look at conditions that we're starting to label, we can't necessarily, these are all great techniques and strategies to help manage it. When it gets to that point, definitely, I don't want to make it sound like that some of those more severe conditions it's just as easy as deep breathing, because it's not an easy fix. And that takes a lot more treatment, a treatment team and a support system, and so I don't want to minimize any of that for any maybe parents or students experiencing those conditions. It's very treatable. I want to be very clear that these conditions are treatable, but it does take a lot of hard work and support and energy.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. With that, thank you so much for adding that, Kristen. I think that's something very important we should all keep in mind. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. We are incredibly grateful to MIT and to Romeo Community Schools for helping us share this information. We will have additional mental health and wellness podcasts about once per month during the school year. Chelsea, Kristen, Kelsey, thank you for being here and for sharing your knowledge.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I too want to thank our mental health professionals for sharing their expertise on such an important topic. I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in. If you haven't done so already, please take the time to listen to recent episodes. For example, our elementary principals talk about culture, collaboration, and curriculum in episode 5, and high school student leaders talk about giving back to their community in episode 6. Coming up, listeners will have an opportunity to hear from high school leadership about student success, the academies of Romeo, and the profile of a Romeo graduate. Thank you for joining us, and tune in next week to keep up with Romeo Community Schools. This podcast is powered by the MIT TV of Romeo, Michigan. If you're looking to start a podcast for your business or personal use, look no further than MIT TV. They can get you access to equipment, a production engineer, and you can even edit your podcasts. That's all right here at the MIT TV of Romeo, Michigan, and you can contact them right now via email at mit.tvromeo@gmail.com. That's mitt.tvromeo@gmail.com.